The Spin-Off Podcast Network.
Are you making the most of your KiwiSaver investment? Generate is an award-winning KiwiSaver provider with a track record of strong long-term performance. Making a smart decision now could add tens of thousands of dollars by the time you reach retirement. Book a no-obligation chat with a Generate KiwiSaver advisor today at generatekiwisaver.co.nz/get-advice. A copy of the product disclosure statement is available at generatekiwisaver.co.nz. The issuer of the scheme is Generate Investment Management Limited, and of course, past performance does not guarantee future returns.
Ryan Reynolds here from Mint Mobile. With the price of just about everything going up during inflation, we thought we'd bring our prices down. So to help us, we brought in a reverse auctioneer, which is apparently a thing.
Mint Mobile Unlimited Premium Wireless. How to get 30, 30, bit to get 30, bit to get 20, 20, 20, bit to get 20, 20, bit to get 15, 15, 15, 15, just $15 a month? Sold! Give it a try at mintmobile.com/switch.
$45 up front for 3 months plus taxes and fees. Promo rate for new customers for limited time. Unlimited more than 40 gigabytes per month. Slows full terms at mintmobile.com.
Do you want to hear like a beautiful story about our chemistry? I got here first this morning, and when I saw Toby walking in, I stood at the window and gave him the fingers, and he didn't see, but I stood there, like watched him the whole way. I was like, no, that didn't work, sat down. And then when you arrived, didn't even talk to him about it. He got up and gave you the fingers the whole way you walked through too.
Well, it wasn't Ben. It was Spin-Off Deputy Editor Alice Neville with his dog.
This isn't true because I came in the front entrance.
Yeah.
Oh, okay, so it was Alice. But it's such a beautiful vibe and connection between us. Like,
It's lovely. Manawatia Matariki. No mai haere mai. It's gone by lunchtime. Thank you to members. Hello T.I. here, Butler, who's back after a brief escape away where he was just doing editing. Nice to have you back.
Tēnā koutou.
he's returned like a bronzed Adonis from the Gold Coast.
Yeah, he's a little bit Adoniser.
With a koala t-shirt. And
you just forgot what I was like. I'm just always like
He's been in the voice gym. Just like benching 300 kgs with those like
with my
vocal cords.
Yeah.
Before we get into it, can we just have a quick shout out to David Larson, who I think we defamed terribly last time. Well, you specifically defamed
I specifically defamed him, and will continue to do so until he can provide independent verification that he did not indeed imprison most of New Air's population.
Yeah, or return to film reviewing, because we miss his film reviews. They were very good in the day.
Oh, was it that David Larson?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So, kia ora, David. Apologies.
Not the one who's a murderer. That Annabelle was.
No.
His name isn't David Larson.
Same guy.
Same guy.
Sorry, David. On the agenda today, the Tauranga by-election, what it does and doesn't mean. The cabinet reshuffle will have some extended discourse on the meaning of the word minor. Who's up, who's down, who's out. We'll also talk about Jacinda Ardern going to Europe on Sunday, a bit of JOGM, a bit of Nato. But first, part of the cabinet reshuffle was Megan Woods being assigned the role, I think this is right, I might be paraphrasing, Minister of Jibboard. She was given, and part of it didn't make a huge splash at the time, she was given, I think, building and construction. She was one of the bits that she was
That's right, that was one
assigned.
of Otto Williams's cut-off ends.
Oh, very good. Yeah, very well done.
Does that mean that like Chris Bishop is going to be the spokesperson for jib stopping?
Oh, very good. Wow. Yes, and the jib board, which is interesting one. I don't know whether it's I sort of avoided it for a bit, but obviously it's suddenly become this almost microcosm. A relatable microcosm, and those have cut through. In politics, it's like we used to have number 8 wire, and now we have jib board. It's this core part of the New Zealand cultural character. Everyone has drawn a hopscotch with a knocked off bit of jib board. Everyone's got a bended moulding bit lent up outside their house. The
crushy, chalky bit that you can, all of that.
Yeah, all of that. Little kind of bits of jib staying around, but because New Zealand construction is so dependent on jib, which is in part because many, the councils require jib to be part of the construction and no alternative. Gibraltar board originally.
Ah.
Yeah, the trustee, as trustee as the Rock of Gibraltar.
Is this
It sounds
cultural
so
appropriation?
exotic.
Well,
Is it high time we got onto this?
it's definitely, I don't think it's
Indeed.
culturally sound because Gibraltar is still occupied by the British,
Contested territory. This feels like we're recolonizing them again.
We'll return to that issue in a future podcast, but now the jib is all wrapped up in red tape. They've run out of it because of supply chains, COVID-affected stuff. Fletcher, who are responsible for the vast majority of jib,
95%.
95% of jib in New Zealand, are under an awful lot of pressure, including from Simplicity and the Shareholders Association, who've demanded the resignation of the chair and the re-election of the board. And it's
Off with their heads.
Ben, is this one of those things that starts off as saying jib, and we like saying jib, but turns out to be something that will have a chapter in the book of this government? The jib board crisis of 2022?
It comes in an unfortunate time. There are, we know that there's been a big shortfall in terms of construction and housing available for New Zealanders to live in. That's why we have sort of 3 families living in a home in South Auckland. That's why people live in garages. That's why we have huge numbers of people in emergency housing, sort of, using the CBD as their living room and, abusing passers-by. The last couple of times I've tried to, gone to use a public toilet in downtown Auckland, I can't tell whether, there's a sort of drug frenzy or an orgy or just public drunkenness happening. It could be any of them, but I don't want to pee there. But anyway, as we
That took an unexpected turn. I wasn't sure where that was going to go.
But in any case, we know that there's been a shortfall in housing, around New Zealand, around the country for decades now. Those numbers were just coming up. They've been coming up for the last few years. Partly because of the high price of property. It's worthwhile for people to develop apartments and units and that sort of thing. This grinds to a halt if they can't get enough jib board. And there are other headwinds on the construction sector right now. There's inflation in other materials. There's a shortage of labour. House prices are falling now, so it's destroying those incentives to build. Right at the time that we're freeing up more land, thanks to the bipartisan efforts of National and Labour to change urban planning rules. It's a terrible time. It's a terrible time to run out of a fundamental building product. And there are a couple of things you could look at, whether it's, it does seem eerily reminiscent of, Fletcher's, which sort of is one of the largest companies in New Zealand and sort of built itself by being the sort of government-endorsed builder. Part of this sort of cozy tie-in of sort of most favoured companies owned by rich families back in New Zealand's sort of early days. And there seems to be a slightly more convoluted but similar sort of thing happening here where there does seem to have been, it probably came from a good place, trying to avoid the leaky homes crisis and a repeat of that, where it was basically settled on that the only thing you can use is jib. We'll never run out of it because there's a factory in New Zealand, so that's what we'll use. But what that means is that, Fletchers are the only people who can provide it. And if they decide to go slow in their factory, everyone else is left hanging. And it seems to have been sort of, that MB and councils sort of thought that the only 2 options were that you either get your jib board, hand-delivered by Hugh Fletcher from their plant, or, the whole of New Zealand goes up in Grenfell Tower sort of infernos. And, people within the industry say that's not the case. They just need to be able to accredit these other supplies. So it does seem like a regulatory failure, going too far in the direction of trying to minimise risk, which has left us vulnerable here. Get the idea that maybe this is the sort of thing that somebody like John Key, who had links to the business community, might have actually been, guys like Kim and Christopher Luxon would sort of get kind of parodied for this, but it is the sort of thing that they could just get on the phone and talk to business about and sort of sort it. Instead, we've got a working group which is going to...
Task force.
Task force.
A strike raptor plasterboard workforce. It's going to be solved in minutes. Annabelle.
I reckon we should just clip up this part of the podcast and send it to the government. Like, we don't need a review. Ben's broken it down for you. But also, another thing to consider is maybe just Google it. Like, get one of your advisors to Google it, find out what's going on and fix it, instead of having a Brachiosaurus task force situation about it.
We could collectivise the jib board. Like, I reckon people have got bits of jib. Like, who doesn't have a bit of jib in the shed? We could cut off ends. Just
the jibathon.
There is a jib.
There is a jibathon. With Megan Woods and is it Chris Bunny, the head of INBI? And they'll do break dancing as for people to courier in their leftover
Beeman, Lucy Lawless and Taika Waititi from Los Angeles being the people of New Zealand.
Yeah, Taika Waititi will be
jib.
like hammering in some jib with Thor's hammer.
It's like the supermarket situation, though, right? Like, whenever you've got a monopoly over something, it just takes one guy to screw it up for the rest of us.
Let's just whack it into the code of conduct for supermarkets.
That they have to supply jib.
Yeah, they have to have a jib aisle.
If Container Door has jib, if they've gone from festoon lights and, like, barbecues, slow cooker barbecues to jib, like, we can do this, guys. It can't be that hard, honestly.
Speaking of regulatory failures, that is something that I've been thinking about, like, the code of conduct for supermarkets and the independent regulator for supermarkets.
Thank God.
And you sort of start to think, what's the potential? It sort of strikes me as the sort of thing that you'd probably want someone from the Commerce Commission just kind of doing part-time as sort of a bit of their job, as opposed to having, like, a dedicated working group which is going to start talking about, quotas of vegetarian food and sort of, you can, increasing the sort of sensitive people times at supermarkets where you don't play any music and the lights are sort of slightly softer, sort of 6 hours a day. It just sort of it suggests to me that there could be overreach, even admitting that there is an issue in the sector right now.
Let's move swiftly on, shall we? Let's move from the jib crisis of New Zealand to the geopolitical crises of Europe, I suppose. Jacinda Ardern is leaving on Sunday. She is going to Europe. She is going to, hopefully, she says, put the final details on a FTA with the EU, where there remain, it seems, some sticking points over the usual suspects being dairy and meat, which the idea of the French rolling over on that one seems reasonably fanciful, so it won't be as good as the British FTA, but they might end up with something. She is going to see Boris Johnson, of course, which I imagine she will try and keep to a fairly brisk hello. She's going to have a lovely cup of tea with Prince William, and she is going to Madrid, where she will be attending the Nato summit. First time a New Zealand leader has been to such a thing. And she will be speaking at it, what's more. And I don't know, what do you think, Annabelle, Ben? What do you think how this fits in with recent direction of travel, in which New Zealand appears to be aligning more closely with the traditional US and Western ally bloc, particularly over the Ukraine crisis, the Russian invasion of Ukraine. And it was interesting, there was a report in Japanese media in the last couple of days that the Japanese PM has been briefing that he is hoping for a meeting on the sidelines of NATO with the Australian and South Korean leaders to discuss, and the quote in the report was, to show a solidarity against a more assertive China. So there's a lot of moving parts, all that stuff. How does this fit?
Yeah, there's been a lot of discussion about, obviously, as we've talked about before, New Zealand is sort of wedged in between China and the United States and what we might broadly call the West. Our trade tends towards China, our strategic interests and our kind of, values as a country more broadly, sort of democracy, liberalism, free speech, that sort of thing, tends more towards the West. what we've seen under this government is not so much turning more towards the West. This is full-on wagons ho, like heading to the Western frontier,
like Little House on the Prairie
Yeah,
vibes.
getting the family together in a caravan, shotguns at the ready. Like, we're ploughing into the West. Attending, NATO, I'm not a geopolitics expert, right? But there are all sorts of international organizations that we are, members of, either diplomatic sort of tie-ups or, global organizations, which is where we see our future. New Zealand's a small trading nation with not a lot of military might or something, depends on the sort of rules-based international order. NATO is a military alliance. It's a military alliance more specifically against Russia, following the fall of the USSR. That's very, very different from anything that New Zealand has done, in the last few decades.
No one is suggesting we are going to join NATO.
No, but even attending a NATO meeting, that's very different from just sort of, being allowed to go and speak at the G7 or something or G20. NATO has a specific purpose, which is, as a bulwark against Russian expansion, essentially. And so that's a pretty clear message. Again, we won't have much to contribute militarily, and I'm sure that whatever the sort of canned comments will be about the sort of the importance of democracy and all that sort of thing. But it sends a really clear message to our erstwhile allies, now close friends in the United States. Signalling our sort of position in what is a new emerging sort of contest between superpowers and regions.
And our challenge really is to send a message, unmistakable message to Vladimir Putin and Russia without, I don't think that report in the Japanese media is necessarily helpful for Ardern's government, because I don't think that their intention necessarily here is to send a strong message to China, unless you're suggesting that it's a kind of a disincentive for any further action in the South China Sea or on Taiwan.
Yeah, that's right. There were sort of whisperings that, it certainly seemed that Putin was taking advantage of what he saw as either instability or cracks in the kind of Western, bloc to try and seize Ukraine. And China was, watching that pretty closely, because they do have, an expansionist agenda in the Asia Pacific, and the counterbalance to that, does involve America. So America's willingness to get involved, and back up its NATO partners, which was in doubt, with when Trump was president, and probably a waning interest for overseas adventurism, I guess, in the American public. The fact that America has gone all in on Ukraine, sends a message to China as well. And I think that us attending NATO, kind of is consonant with that.
Well, it's gone all in on Ukraine up to the point of not going in on Ukraine, to be clear. But Annabelle, the Prime Minister's speech at NATO will presumably attract a reasonable amount of attention. What would you like to hear her say on that stage?
I would like to hear her call for, for disarmament, and I think it's an incredibly fine line that she's going to have to toe, and I think it's probably going to annoy China more than Russia that she's there, and difficult times for New Zealand as we plot our course in the new world order, and we really have to think about what we're doing with our economy, because we can't afford to get too far offside with China unless you're prepared to fundamentally change that our economy is based on dairy.
Yeah, very good piece by Brad Olson on the spin-off, which pointed out that the 0.2% contraction in the New Zealand economy at the beginning of the year, which means we're halfway through to a technical recession, was driven by a drop in exports. Now, that wasn't because, China closed the doors, but it's a signal of what happens what can happen if if we don't develop alternative markets and if China starts getting more sort of bearish and assertive against our trade, which is often their primary mechanism for dealing with particularly smaller countries that displease them. Exports, I think, were down 14% at the beginning of the year, and part of that's tourism and things like that still aren't back on board. But anyway, it shows we're a small trading nation. We always have been. That's how we've defined ourselves. It is very important that we open up alternative markets.
Weighing in with soybeans and a baby show straight out of Norburn, Missouri, we have Soybean Festival. From Hayward, Wisconsin, at 73 years young with the world's largest muskie statue, put it together for Muskie Fest. Finally, packing a punch with fire dancing and a pet costume contest, the Roseau, Minnesota Fall Harvest Fest. One of these festivals could win $100,000 in the Cenex Hometown Throwdown. You decide. Cast your vote at CenexHometownThrowdown.com. Cenex, powered locally.
I'm Toby Manhire, and this is Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government, a podcast in 6 parts.
Doesn't give my opponents much time to run up to an election, does it?
This nation is at risk.
What do you think you're up to now, you perverted little liar?
I could smell the uranium on it as you lean towards it.
There's a radical overhaul in the history of New Zealand's administration.
Juggernaut, the story of the Fourth Labour government, made with the support of New Zealand On Air. Listen now on The Spin-Off or wherever you get your podcasts.
Are you curious about how business can be better? I'm Simon Pound, and I host Business is Boring, a podcast where I kōrero with some of the most interesting people in entrepreneurship, commerce, and making things happen. Tune in to Business is Boring every Tuesday, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with Spark Business Lab.
Let's shuttle again from Madrid to Tauranga, where on Saturday night a by-election saw National retain the seat. Sam Uffindale scored 56.3% of a low turnout, but not an astonishingly low turnout in the context of by-elections. They don't tend to attract huge numbers unless there's a particular amount of drama or
an axe to grind.
or a knife's edge. The last one that had more than 60% turnout was Northland when we had Willagene Prime and Winston Peters and all of that. Annabelle, 56.3% to Sam Uffindale. Jan Tinetti came in at 25.7%. ACT, just over 10%. New Zealand First did not stand. The Greens did not stand. So, of course, you could suggest that 25 point something for Labour's candidate Jan Tinetti includes some Green votes. Who'd be most pleased? Whom most disappointed? Does it offer any omens, any signals beyond a snapshot?
Well, I think ACT are pretty chuffed with themselves and their candidate. I think he pulled 10%. But I don't think you can read too much into that given that New Zealand First didn't stand. It's a respectable result for National. It's what it should be. Essentially Labour didn't really contest the by-election in a meaningful way. So I don't think
they began every sentence with "we can't expect to."
So I don't think you can really read a whole lot into it. And for people that are comparing it to the 2020 result and forecasting doom and gloom, the 2020 result was such a weird, skewed result that I don't think you can put a whole lot of stock into it. It's what you would expect, other than the anti-vaxxers pulling in about 5%.
Yeah, see, I don't even think that's particularly weird. Low turnout. You would think that the people who think that they're engaged in a life and death struggle against a government that, needs to be hanged on the forecourt of Parliament or whatever, you would think they would be more motivated to get out and vote than people who are sort of, I always vote National, or, Jan Tinetti used to be my kid's principal, something like that. And it was 5% combined, right? So a few of these sort of factional things,
I think any time you see a movement like that starting to pop up, it's got to be a concern. I don't think they're going to come storming home in the election. I think if this had been closer to the lockdowns and the parliamentary protests, they may have got higher. But sometimes you just need some weird quirk of timing for a movement like that to pop up in a parliament somewhere. So I don't think it's panic stations quite yet, but it's worth keeping an eye on.
Well, it's interesting certainly that even on the night of the vote, the Freedom and Rights Coalition, which is the organisation set up by Brian Tamaki and Destiny's Church that have predates the mandates, but definitely built on that movement and established themselves in a pretty prominent role in the parliamentary occupation. We're celebrating the result, and there are quite a few leaders in the many different, like probably a dozen different factions within that broader self-described freedom movement who are all calling, we need to come together under one banner. Some of them saying we must repudiate politics altogether. But the difficulty is that I think a fair number of those who are saying we all need to come together under one banner, I don't care who, what they really mean is under me. And there is an awful lot of ego, an awful lot of really quite contradictory worldview that exists within. When my enemy's enemy is my friend, it's pretty straightforward, and you're outside Parliament, and at last you feel as though you've found a family. Once you have to move on to something else, it becomes a lot harder. So I think the challenge there will be to keep a common cause in the lead up.
And they're never going to win an electorate seat. The only way that there's any kind of fathomable way of them getting it would be. Yeah. 5%. Which would be a 5%. So that would require them to get their shit together and keep it together for several months, and I think that's unlikely. But it
does also create an interesting question around the various pushes, and there are multiple of them now that are calling for a lowering of the threshold, which is a debate that whether or not that debate will be or should be impacted by the potential for a group of people such as these to find a way actually into Parliament through electoral means rather than by charging through police lines will be interesting to see.
Yeah, I think it might bring a bit more focus onto parts of, because I think this is in the Greens private members bill, isn't it? Reducing the threshold to 4%.
Yeah, and I think it's the thing that the working group is considering as well.
Yeah, because I think the Electoral Commission reviewed it.
The Law Commission back in the day did,
and suggested
said 4.
That. And I don't.
So did the Royal Commission at the outset, I think.
Yeah, and I don't tend to agree. I think 5% is a good
You say
threshold.
1%. You say 1%, don't you, Ben?
No.
10%?
No. One of the things that I really like about New Zealand is that we are quite stable and non-insane as a country. If you were to profile our country sort of psychologically, you'd say we suffer from seasonal affective disorder and probably low-grade depression most of the year. But
just a consistent hum rather than
but as opposed to the sort of the United States, there was this massive polarization, and you can see, one of their major parties, the Republican Party, has actually gone kind of mad, and that's been as a result of, if you think back to when Trump was actually running, not just, he won the nomination by only having about 25% support of Republican voters at the time, which is about 12.5% of the country. And in New Zealand, because of MMP, you couldn't do that. You couldn't have a fringe figure take over a major political party like that. And I think we should have defence, because MMP was, the mixed member proportional system in Germany was actually brought in as a bulwark against fascism, right? It was put in to prevent, fringe interests from being in Parliament and being legitimated. And I think 5% is probably a better threshold than 4% for that.
That's just maths, I guess, isn't it?
It's arithmetic, Tanga, I believe
listen,
they call it.
I'm going to do a quiz time, okay. This is face the music type thing. Sorry, Te, I don't know if this will work. Let's give it a go. Okay, what's that?
Is that the parliamentary band or something?
Yeah, that's Trevor Mallard being played out of Parliament to Barry Manilow.
That is, okay, you ready? You ready for this? Yeah. That's A minor shuffle. So I guess we'll just wind up the podcast there, shall we?
Yeah,
I don't know whether
I think
there's anywhere to go.
Wind up all podcasts. We've done it.
We've just clocked podcast.
It's been lovely being with you all, and I'm sorry to say goodbye, but clearly the time is nigh.
That got a lot of the minor reshuffle as it was spun. The question of whether it was minor got a lot of attention, so we won't go over that anymore, do we? It wasn't.
I don't even know why that got a lot of attention. Like, it seems, you could understand if it was something that they were doing in secret and they said, we've done a minor reshuffle. And then, 6 months later, we found out actually it was really major. But I think if in the morning you say you're going to do a minor reshuffle and then in the afternoon it turns out to be quite a significant reshuffle, there's not really much harm or foul there.
Do you not? No. I mean, no, I think some of us, me included, probably got overexcited by that for sure. But it's still, if the spin is this is a minor reshuffle and then it's more than that, that's annoying. And it's spin. And spin is to be denounced at every turn. Anyway, the other part of it is that I think there was a bit of sleight of hand in the reshuffle, or a clever framing, if you prefer, because it was presented as we've had a couple of departures, which have set the dominoes in course that we need to make this various reshuffle. Well,
also we're sacking Poto Williams.
Right. Right. Well, moving Poto Williams out of one portfolio into another. That was not.
She accidentally got packed in the boxes when Trevor was moving out of his office. She's ended up in the conservation portfolio.
On my big chart on my bedroom wall and maps out everything. There is no line that links those two facts. Anyway, look, let's run through them. We'll get to Mallard at the end. We're running out of time, so let's just have quick thoughts along the way on the different elements of it. Chris Farfoy, he's leaving. You could tell, it seemed to me that for some time you could tell that his mind wasn't completely there, and turns out that his mind was partly walking his son to school, which is quite sweet. Genuine person who is mostly, admired, respected, decent person, smart guy. Heart wasn't quite in it. Gives his valedictory.
It's so weird because kids just before they start school are at the peak of their most annoying. I'm like, bro, wait till he gets to school and then quit, because then you've got all day to chill by yourself. But
yeah, okay.
They're whoreha at that age. Anyway.
Desperate suggestion that he reconsider or become cabinet minister at large. That's the other way to go. New role. Ben?
Yeah, look, we've all said it. We all think it. It's true. Farfoy is probably the nicest guy in Parliament. He's a genuinely lovely person. He's been a better estimate of his own abilities than his colleagues have been. I think I said on RNZ, one of the first interviews he did after he became an MP, he said, I'm not really into policy. It's not my strength. Everyone knows I'm not a policy guy. And Ardern put him into justice, which is, pure policy. He's dealing with highly conceptual issues like hate speech, conversion therapy, electoral reform, very detail laden. And and immigration, which is that's not sort of high concept stuff, but it's very detail driven. And for most of his time in that portfolio, it looked like Erica Stanford, the opposition spokesperson, was not just sort of running him into the ground, but also seemed to actually have a better understanding of how the immigration system worked than the minister did. And he just didn't, he wasn't suited for it. He didn't want to be there. And the downside of that is that nice guy that he is, and he is a great human being, he probably inflicted a lot of unnecessary hurt on New Zealanders outside the border, on immigrants who were stuck here because of COVID. And it was a bad decision from the beginning. It probably should have come to an end sooner. But I think I join everyone in wishing Farfoy the best for the rest of his career.
Eric Stanford, just quickly. sidebar, incredibly impressive on Q&A on the weekend.
She swore.
If it weren't for she swore.
She said bugger.
Bugger's okay, isn't it?
I think so.
That was introduced into the acceptable lexicon in the Toyota ad, I think. So that's fine. Kerry Allen takes over Justice.
Yep, you'd expect. Well, you might not expect that. I mean, she's a lawyer. She has been, the star of the, new ministers. That's pretty incontrovertible. One thing that sort of sometimes gets missed in reshuffles, because we talk about, new blood and getting the electorate excited about these new faces, is that the majority of the public actually can't name any politicians apart from the Prime Minister, the Leader of the Opposition, David Seymour since he's been on Dancing with the Stars, and a handful of others, probably Chris Hipkins, certainly. But, even very senior ministers like David Parker would probably not have particularly high name or face recognition in the public. Kerry Allen, thanks to the tsunami warning, and sort of appearing in, kind of a preview of Top Gun Maverick in her jumpsuit, is somebody who's had real cut through with the public. She's been a very competent minister. She's a very good conservation minister. And has that kind of public cut through, has that sort of kind of image with the public. She's got charisma.
She speaks in a way that people understand, doesn't she?
Yeah, she's a classic Kiwi rugby bloke, and she's just very, very present as a politician. So it makes sense that you would not only promote her on, competence, but also because you do want to give an impression to the public that, you've got political leaders that they can relate to.
I do think her legal background stands her in good stead, and she's a great communicator and all of that stuff. But I think, what's going on in a wider sense in terms of crime and the 501s and 3 strikes and all of that, I do worry that because she's a wahine Māori, that she will become a target for the racist right who will run lines about how, she's soft on this stuff because, gangs and all of that sort of shit. I do think that she will experience a lot, a bit of a backlash in terms of some of the commentary out there and how it's perceived. I think one of the things that's interesting for me is the commentary around Trevor Mallard. And how he has really enraged a group of older white men. And it's been largely around the first, obviously, people were annoyed about the legal case where he defamed a parliamentary worker, which is absolutely fair enough, cost the taxpayers $300,000 defending that, and he lost. But a lot of it has been around the parliamentary protests and how he handled it. And I think that, in truth, a lot of the outrage against Trevor Mallard is actually because he's made Parliament a more accommodating and safer place for women and children. And I think that really irks a lot of older white males on both the left and the right. But because you can't really say that in public, they've made it all about the parliamentary protests. If you think getting a bit of water sprayed on you and listening to Barry Manilow is the most horrific thing that can happen to you during a protest, go and watch Merata Mita's movie about what happened up at Bastion Point. Go watch her movie on documentary on the Springbok tour. Calm down, everyone. And I think that's what it's really about. But, he was always an odd choice for Speaker. He's a very reactive person who acts before he thinks, and that's got him in trouble. But I think his legacy of, making parliamentary a safe space for mums where they can bring their babies into the house and all of that stuff is actually a really cool one and one to be proud of.
Yeah, look, I think he definitely did good in the role, in particular in the ways that you're talking about. But I think in parts, he overcorrected, and I think that's actually the source of a lot of the frustration, which was, not that he was, it wasn't so much, and maybe it is tied up with this idea of kind of changing the character of Parliament, but I think there was a lot of concern, again across the House, that he just really sort of diminished the dignity of Parliament, and it wasn't because he was giving a baby a bottle, while he was chairing the House. It was because the Speaker, who should normally have a pretty low public profile, was making false rape allegations on RNZ and, conducting himself, I don't think anyone thought that he was being a sort of, a strong man police oppressor or something during the protests. I think he just he was acting like a clown, and he just made the whole thing a sort of farce. And, even when he was trying hard, in terms of question time, he introduced this innovation where he would sort of penalise supplementary questions or give more supplementary questions for bad behaviour or failing to answer questions, that sort of thing. Now, he had the best of intentions with that. It was good classic economic analysis of providing the right incentives for good behaviour. But what it actually did was sort of destabilise the whole event, and it made it much harder for the opposition, to plan, their lines of sort of inquiry if they didn't know how many supplementary questions they would have. Getting more supplementary questions in the event of bad behaviour from the government doesn't really help you if you haven't planned for those as an opposition, whereas losing supplementary questions hurts you a lot. And Mallard sort of, started just going crazy with it. No one could even keep track of, what was happening. And
it was number wang.
It was number wang, whatever that is. But is that an internet thing?
I think it's a fast show thing. No, it's a Mitchell and Webb thing.
He was a bizarre choice for Speaker, but I don't think he's the malevolent force that he's been characterised as. But I think Adrian Dudafi, on the other hand, is going to be a really great speaker. And I think that his more kind of circumspect approach, and, he does have that kind of elder statesman vibe, but he's also got a bit of steel to him. Like I've seen him in a, debate that we had for Te Taihawauru. So there's some kaha there as well. So I think he's an excellent replacement.
It's to Mallard's credit that it seems as though he has been, prepared, blooded into that role, and has been doing a good job. And I feel like everyone is probably ready from Trevor Mallard down. He's going to, by the way, in case you missed it, he is going to diplomatic posting to an ambassadorial or high commissioner role in Europe.
And Ireland,
well, I guess it'll be an ambassador, won't be a high commissioner. Well, anyway, Ireland is the hot tip. Go and set up somewhere in Dublin, have a nice time in the Temple Bar. Could be lovely. Let's quickly talk, though, do we want to talk about Michael Wood, who is obviously another of the real performers, a kind of reasonably new addition, came himself in a by-election recently. He goes to immigration, so that will be someone who you'll expect to get his head around the portfolio. He's already got a lot on. Willie Jackson takes over the media and broadcasting bit of Farfoy's, the three portfolios he had. Jackson we all know who Willie Jackson is. We can maybe talk about that another time.
Small modifications.
He's already been involved in the
RNZ TVNZ Radio Watia merger.
But the bit that we should touch on is the police bit, which, as I said, didn't have any direct link. It was slightly untethered from the rest of the reshuffle. But Chris Hipkins has been brought in, called by everyone Fix-It Hipkins, to take over the police role. He famously drinks Coke Zero. He
studied criminology,
oversaw COVID Zero, and now he's going to bring Crime Zero to New Zealand. There will be no crime once he's finished with it. He'll get up there every day and announce the end of all the crime. Is it
arrest numbers?
Arrest numbers. Yep. Ram raids.
He'll put your hands against the wall and spread your legs.
Okay. I think again we've covered everything there. But it's sort of, there was a sense that there needed to be a change there. the Porter Williams approach. Ardern didn't quite say she got it wrong, but the approach didn't seem to fit the moment. She said something. It was quite something relevant. She said it wasn't the right narrative, which is I felt like was a what do you call it?
Breaking the fourth wall,
a Kinsley gaffe. Where you say something that is true that you didn't mean to say. It's about narrative, right?
Yeah, I think she seemed remarkably sort of upfront that. It was one of those, in the old days you'd say, the minister's issues have become a distraction from the important work in the portfolio. And this went even a step further, which was basically that we are finding it hard to concentrate on the issues that we want to do because of the narrative. And so Poto has to go because of the narrative. The narrative in this case is that, Chris Hipkins' dad's come back to sort it all out. Your old fave, Chris Hipkins, minister of about 80% of the portfolios in cabinet now.
And still doesn't look a day over 25. Although the COVID did.
I feel sad for conservation though.
Yeah, no, but it does.
It's like all of this flora and fauna that's seriously threatened, and we give the most underperforming minister in the Labor government conservation. It's
but she's same ranking.
Throw the ball. Why don't you
ranking.
give it to Martima Davidson?
I don't think...
Give Martima Davidson a go. Spread the love. Help out the Greens. Boost them up.
Porter Williams is... she's very competent. I've dealt with her before. She's not inept. She wasn't sort of promoted to cabinet by accident. But the Prime Minister's right, and the media were right. It was the wrong presentation. She wasn't able to sort of, and you're limited as to what you can do as Minister of Police, right? Because it is, the police have operational independence. You can't tell them to go out and arrest either ram raiders or your political enemies, right? Which is probably a good thing. But it means that you have to give the sort of appearance that you're tough on crime to kind of reassure people. Claire Trevett said, Porter Williams was at a disadvantage because she's a sort of sensible, sort of unforthcoming kind of person, and Mark Mitchell looks like a cop.
I thought what Audrey Young said was right on the money, which is that she made Mark look like way better than he actually is.
It wasn't the right portfolio for her. But I'm sure she'll do a good job in conservation. Kerry Allen starting some, pretty big reforms.
It's a massive department, right?
Ooh.
Like there, it's not. I mean, quite apart from being really important to New Zealand, it's also things can go wrong in there unexpectedly, given the sheer number of people that are involved.
Yeah, there's that. I mean, the big thing, one of the big things for conservation right now is, they're dealing with the stewardship land and where that's all going to go. That's about 10% of the country, right? And, whether you sell parts of it off, whether you classify it as conservation land, they're currently grappling with how to deal with their treaty relationship following some court judgments, which said that they were basically interpreting the law wrong in terms of how they dealt with iwi. So they've got to really look at a new direction there. That's a big piece of work, and there is a lot of internal resistance inside organisations like DOC.
They hate the thought of being the subordinate partner when it comes to co-governance of certain places.
Well, look, it's changing, and there's different people within the organisations, but any big organisation you will have inertia, and there's a lot happening in DOC. There'll be it's certainly not a demotion to be in charge, to go to conservation. Conservation is, first of all, very important. There's a lot of important issues. And the second thing is that it's great because you get your photo taken cuddling kiwis instead of, next to smashed shop windows. It's terrific. People used to really fight tooth and nail for conservation because of the photo ops, because of the good news.
Very quickly, just rattle through. Annabelle's making signals to me. She's playing Wordle with one hand and saying "wrap it up" with the other. What else happens? Aisha Varel takes a COVID-19. Nobody would argue with that. Megan Woods, Science Innovation portfolio goes to her too. Priyanka Radhakrishnan moves into cabinet, takes workplace relations. Kieran McNulty, who'd been chief whip, gets a bit of local government, ministerial role outside cabinet, which will be to alleviate some of the burden that is currently on Nanaia Mahuta.
He's going to be the Minister for Regional Charm Offensive.
Someone was saying he sold his ute, which seems really problematic. Barbara Edmonds is obviously another rising star, and she's going to chair the Finance and Expenditure Committee.
And she'll be a minister early next year.
All of those things, many more. But look, it's Matariki. And I think it's the shortest. When is the shortest day?
It was yesterday.
Oh, great. We're on the up.
Yeah.
Annabelle, did I see you on the TV? Are you doing a TV thing at Matariki?
Doing a panel on Matariki morning.
And have you recorded that?
Yeah.
How was it?
It was awesome.
Was it?
Yeah, it was really cool.
What about you, Ben? Have you been invited to be on any Matariki panels?
I'm excited to learn a third constellation that I can identify, along with Orion and the Southern Cross.
It's probably going to be like the most enduring legacy of this government is this Matariki holiday, I think. And in a couple of years' time, we'll forget that there were some idiots that didn't want it to be named Matariki and all of that stuff. And
well, I'm going to go home and make many constellations out of my cut-off bits of Jibboard. This has gone by lunchtime. Thanks, Tiahe. Thanks, Ben. Thanks, Annabelle. Thanks, listeners. Thanks, members. Kia ora.
Do you find it hard staying optimistic with all the financial news in the media? I'm Bernard Hickey, and on my podcast, When the Facts Change, I'm here to help you navigate the ever-changing landscape of economics in Aotearoa. So join the conversation every Friday on When the Facts Change, brought to you by the Spin-Off Podcast Network in partnership with KiwiBet.
This is Climate Adaptation.
We are the Pōtiki of the Taiao.
And the words of those keeping the home fires burning.
It's more than just going along and planting some trees. You got to be able to defend that place to the end of your life.
We have the solutions. We just need to come back to the belief in ourselves as rangatira.
Join me, Nadine Hura, and Ruia Āpirehama for Ko Papa Ko Rangi Series 2, Ahi Ka. Brought to you by Te Komato Te Tonga, the Deep South Challenge, out now on the Spin-Off Podcast Network or wherever you get your podcasts.
The Spin-Off Podcast Network.